Go ahead and decide whether a birthday game can really destroy a marriage. I was not trying to humiliate my husband. I was trying to make him show some strength for once. 6 men agreed to play, the rules were clear, and everyone laughed because they understood what I meant. My husband only pressed his thumb against the old scar in his palm, the way he always did when he needed me to make a decision for him. I rang the bell every time another man proved he had more backbone. By the final round, I was certain the whole room had accepted my version of him. My name is Nadia Kerr. I was 37, and I designed leadership workshops for companies that wanted confident employees without difficult managers. Technically, I taught people how to say no. That detail became important later, though at the time it only made my idea seem clever. Luke and I had been together 10 years and married for 6. He worked as a rehabilitation therapist, mostly with children recovering from injuries. People loved his patience. Parents trusted his quiet voice. Children trusted his hands. At home, that same patience often looked like retreat. Luke never chose the restaurant. He never challenged a rude neighbor. If his sister changed our holiday plans, he adjusted. If I asked which sofa he wanted, he said either one was fine, then looked tired when I bought the expensive one. 3 choices. 3 shrugs. One wife expected to carry the result. Still, something real had held us together. After knee surgery 5 years earlier, I spent 8 weeks learning to walk without fear. Luke came home from the clinic every night and worked with me on the hallway rug. He never rushed me. When I finally crossed the hall without support, he rang a small brass bell that had belonged to his grandfather's boxing gym. The bell later sat at his clinic. Children rang it when they completed a hard exercise. Luke trusted me to collect it before his birthday because I said I wanted it near the cake. He thought I was honoring the gentlest part of him. I had another use for it. My father raised 2 loud sons and 1 daughter who was praised whenever she stayed agreeable. When I became direct, he called me difficult. When my brothers did the same, he called them leaders. Of course, I built a career from proving I could lead any room. The idea came during a client workshop about boundaries. One manager joked that confident people could say no without explaining themselves. I pictured Luke agreeing to another family favor while our own plans disappeared. Then I pictured 6 stronger men showing him how a boundary looked. I called the game Backbone Challenge. My colleague Elena loved it. She said a birthday version could also become a perfect demonstration for future clients. 4 rounds, 6 male guests, black wristbands for strong answers, the brass bell for every point Luke failed to earn. That night, Luke saw the draft cards spread across my office floor. He picked up one that asked a man to refuse an unfair request. His thumb pressed into the pale scar at the base of his right palm. He asked whether a game could still be a gift if the birthday person had not chosen it. I told him the surprise was the point. Technically, I had answered. Victor Hale owned Summit North, a private climbing gym with clean white walls, bright ropes, and a lounge companies rented for team events. He had the confidence Luke lacked. Victor made a decision while other people were still explaining the problem, and he never apologized for taking up space. He was not a romantic interest. I need that understood. What attracted me was his certainty, not his body. He spoke the language of bookings, results, and repeat clients. When I described Backbone Challenge, he saw a product before I finished the second round. Victor offered the gym for Luke's birthday at half price if 2 invited HR directors could observe. If the event worked, we would sell a corporate version together. He asked one practical question before agreeing. Did Luke know he would be the comparison subject? I said Luke understood my work and had given general consent. That was not a complete lie. Luke knew I designed games. He knew the bell would be at his party. He simply did not know 6 men would be scored against him. Victor sent a consent form that afternoon. I typed Luke's name into the subject line, marked verbal approval, and returned it. Technically, no signature box had been required on that first draft. Elena helped me build the rounds. Say no would test direct refusal. Take the lead would force each man to make an unpopular choice. Hold your ground used a safe balance platform while the room tried to distract him. Final choice would ask each contestant, whether protecting peace was worth losing respect. Luke's cards were different. His first asked him to refuse when I handed him my coat. His second asked him to correct me in front of guests. His third asked whether he had ever stayed quiet because he feared I would leave. The other men received workplace examples. Luke received our marriage. I built a score grid to make the comparison look fair. 1 point for a direct refusal. 1 for steady eye contact. 1 for making a choice without asking the group. A bonus wristband would go to any man who challenged me and held his position. Luke could have earned every point. I simply knew he would not. Victor rejected my first idea of letting the audience shout scores. He said group pressure made weak behavior look popular. I reminded him that pressure was the product. Companies did not hire me to study people in comfort. We settled on a digital board controlled from his tablet, though I kept the final decision over each wristband. That was Victor's real flaw. He could identify a bad boundary and still rent space beside it if the contract looked promising. I respected that because I did the same thing with risk. We both called it business. Elena called that emotional truth. I called it good design. Our enabler was not cruel. Elena needed the gym partnership because our workshop bookings had slowed. She laughed at my sharper cards because laughter made the risk sound creative. When I asked whether the Doormat comparison was too direct, she said direct titles sold. 2 days later, Luke came to my office doorway while I was numbering the cards. He asked why Victor had sent him a message about the final choice round. I kept my face still. 4 cards, 6 wristbands, 1 husband who finally seemed interested. I told him Victor must have confused our home event with a corporate booking. Luke pressed his thumb into the scar on his palm and asked where I planned to use his grandfather's bell. The question was too exact. I decided Victor had mentioned the prop while checking the venue list. Men who ran businesses always over-explained equipment. I said the bell would mark strong answers and make the room feel playful. Luke asked who would decide which answers were strong. I told him I would, because I was the trained facilitator. He said that was what worried him. What I heard was another quiet man making a woman's competence sound dangerous. I told him his discomfort proved the exercise had value. If saying no felt hard, then the game might teach him something useful. Luke asked if his birthday had become unpaid training. I said it had become more thoughtful than another dinner where everyone pretended he enjoyed attention. He looked at the cards for a long time. His thumb stayed on the scar. Then he asked whether I would cancel if he said no now. I did not answer directly. I told him deposits had been paid and clients invited. Cancelling would damage my professional name. Luke nodded once. I read that as acceptance. The first fracture appeared at dinner with his sister Ruth. She was an emergency dispatcher and had no patience for language that hid decisions. When I mentioned the birthday challenge, she asked whether Luke wanted to be tested in front of his friends. I said husbands and wives challenged each other all the time. Ruth asked Luke, not me. He moved his thumb across the scar and said he was still waiting for the complete rules. Ruth looked at my face. The pause lasted long enough to feel rude. I explained that revealing every rule would ruin the fun. She said surprise and consent were not the same thing. That sentence sounded borrowed from a workplace poster, so I dismissed it. Victor sent a revised event agreement the next morning. The new version required written approval from every person used as an example. Luke's name appeared in bold at the top. I called Victor and asked why he had changed the form. He said his staff had reviewed the run sheet and wanted clean boundaries. His voice was shorter than before. He still wanted the event, but he no longer sounded excited by every detail. I told Elena that Victor was protecting himself. She answered that venue owners always became nervous before an unusual event. Then she suggested a preview night so everyone could see the game was harmless. Elena also began rehearsing the contestants. Paul kept turning every refusal into a joke, so she taught him to shorten his answer. Simon asked whether his partner would hear the personal cards. Elena told him the birthday version was private. I knew partners were invited, but correcting her would have slowed the rehearsal. 1 omission. 2 cleaner answers. 6 men beginning to sound brave on command. That solved 2 problems. Victor would relax, and Luke would learn that an audience rewarded men who acted decisively. I scheduled the preview for the following Thursday. Luke said he had a late clinic shift. I reminded him the event carried his name. He stared at me, pressed the scar once, and said he would be there. Technically, that was consent. The preview took place in the training corner at Summit North. Victor invited 4 gym employees. Elena brought 2 workshop assistants. Ruth came without asking me, and Luke arrived in his clinic clothes with 10 minutes to spare. The climbing walls rose behind us like bright, unfinished buildings. Rubber flooring softened every step. The brass bell stood on a white pedestal beside 6 black wristbands. Under the lights, it looked less like a family object and more like something I had created. Victor asked me to explain the rules before anyone played. I said Backbone Challenge measured the courage to refuse pressure. Each contestant would draw a card, respond, and receive a wristband if the room believed his answer showed strength. One gym employee asked who represented the room. I said I did. The first contestant was Aaron, Luke's neighbor. His card asked him to refuse a partner who wanted him to cancel a fishing trip. Aaron laughed and said he would protect the trip. The small audience laughed too. I rang the bell. The next man chose a work card and refused an imaginary weekend shift. Bell. Luke drew the card about my coat. I placed it in his arms and asked him to say no. He folded it over a chair instead. I asked if he had heard the instruction. He said he had, but the coat was already in his hands and putting it down cost him nothing. I told the room that this was exactly how a doormat defended being stepped on. A few people laughed. Elena laughed first, a little too loudly. Ruth did not move. No bell for Luke. Victor asked Luke directly whether he wanted the preview to continue. I answered before Luke could speak and said stopping after 1 week round would embarrass him more. Victor repeated the question to Luke. Luke studied the wristbands, the camera, and the bell. His thumb moved across the scar. He said he wanted to see the complete game I had built for him. I heard pride underneath the answer. He did not want to quit in front of Ruth. Technically, the birthday subject had now chosen to continue, and I made sure Victor heard it. Round 2 asked each man to challenge a wrong statement. Victor claimed the safest climbing knot was the fastest one. Aaron corrected him at once. Bell. When Luke's turn came, I said a good husband protected peace even when his wife was wrong. Luke watched me. His thumb found the scar in his palm. He answered that peace built on one person disappearing was not peace. That should have earned a point, but I said the sentence was too general. A strong man would have named the person who was wrong. I asked if he could say my name and tell the room I was wrong. Luke looked toward Victor, then at the camera fixed above the training area. He asked whether the preview was being recorded. Victor said safety cameras covered every event space. Luke asked him to preserve the full recording, not only the clips selected for promotion. I laughed and told the group that Luke needed evidence before he could disagree with his own wife. This time, only 2 people joined me. I rang the bell for myself. The sound was brighter than I expected. Luke's face changed, but not with anger. He looked at the bell the way people look at an old house after strangers have moved into it. Elena suggested we move to hold your ground. Her voice had lost its early sparkle. The balance platform was wide and safe. Contestants stood on it while the room offered small distractions. Aaron stayed centered while Victor moved a foam block near his feet. Bell. Another man completed the task while Elena asked rapid questions. Bell. Luke stepped onto the platform. I did not use foam blocks. I asked whether he had ever agreed with me because he feared losing me. Ruth told me to stop. Victor lifted one hand but did not interrupt. Luke remained balanced. He said he had agreed because conflict in his childhood home always ended with someone leaving. He had believed calm could keep love safe. For 1 slow second, nobody treated the answer like a game. I closed that space before it could turn against me. I said fear explained weakness but did not transform it into strength. Then I rang the bell for every man who had answered faster than Luke. 3 rings. 4. 5. Luke stepped down and asked Victor for a copy of the event rules. Victor said he would send them that night. They spoke like two people completing a transaction. I decided Luke wanted rules because feelings had defeated him. Ruth left before the preview ended. Aaron removed his wristband and placed it beside the bell. One workshop assistant said she needed an early train. The room was shrinking, but I called that normal fatigue. Paul stayed long enough to ask Luke whether the personal cards were real. Luke said the words on the cards were mine, but the behavior behind them belonged to both of us. Paul rubbed the black wristband between two fingers, then put it in his pocket instead of wearing it home. Simon asked Victor when the safety video would be deleted. Victor said standard policy kept it for 30 days. I began packing before their caution could become another discussion. The bell went into my case. The cards went into Elena's bag. Luke carried nothing, although the whole preview had used his life as equipment. I ended with a short explanation about confident leadership. Nobody asked a question. In the parking lot, Luke said the bell had marked the moment children learned their bodies could do more than they feared. He asked why I had turned it into a sound for his failure. I told him symbols changed when people grew. His grandfather's boxing bell had once ended violent rounds. Luke had already changed its meaning at the clinic. I was allowed to change it again. He pressed his thumb into the scar and asked if I heard myself. I heard a successful preview with a few pacing problems. Technically, that was useful data. The next morning, a potential client named Dana Holt asked whether the birthday version would include real marital conflict. I told her real pressure created honest behavior and invited her to watch the final event. Elena read my invitation draft and removed the sentence, promising that Luke would discover his real rank among the men he respected. She said clients might read that as humiliation instead of development. I restored the sentence after she left the shared document. A product needed a clear promise, and my promise was that the room would finally see the difference between kindness and weakness. By then, Backbone Challenge was no longer only a party game. It was the product that would put my company back in rooms that mattered. The preview followed us home. Luke moved the bell from my office desk into its padded case, but I took it out again the next morning. We did not argue over it. Arguments require two people willing to stay inside the same subject. Luke slept in the guest room for 3 nights. I told Elena he was creating drama through silence. Her reply came 4 hours later and contained no joke. She said perhaps the personal cards should be removed. The contestants changed too. Paul asked for a copy of every card with his name on it. Simon said his partner would attend or he would withdraw. Malik, Victor's replacement contestant, refused to rehearse any question about marriage. I called their caution proof that Luke had made private discomfort contagious. 3 men, 3 new conditions. 1 facilitator still responsible for keeping the event alive. I agreed to soften them. That was my micro-shift. I changed the title on Luke's 3rd card from fear of losing his wife to keeping peace at any cost. Same question. Better packaging. Technically, I had compromised. Ruth came to our house on Saturday carrying the revised consent form. She placed it on the entry table and asked Luke whether the signature at the bottom was his. It was not. I had typed his name into the first form, but the revised copy showed a rough mark where a signature should have been. Elena had added it when submitting the final event file. She assumed I had permission. I had assumed Luke would attend. Assumptions often look identical to consent when a deadline is close. Ruth asked me who signed it. I said our office handled routine forms and no one intended fraud. Luke did not accuse me of signing anything. He only looked at the bell in its open case and pressed his thumb against his scar. His silence gave Ruth more space than my explanation. She said Luke had spent years making himself easy for everyone, including her. She admitted that she had changed holiday plans because she knew he would bend. Then she said his weakness did not make my game honest. That was harder to dismiss. Ruth had benefited from the same flaw I named. After she left, Luke sat on the bottom stair. There was no hidden strength in him then. He looked tired and older than 40. He said he had spent his career teaching injured people that asking for help was not weakness, yet at home he had treated every disagreement like an injury he could prevent by staying still. He opened the bell case and ran one finger around the worn velvet. Luke reminded me of a boy at his clinic who had needed 4 months to stand after a car accident. The child rang the bell once, then asked Luke to ring it too because they had both been afraid. Luke said the sound had never meant beating another person. It meant beating the fear that kept someone from moving. I told him symbols belonged to whoever understood how to use them. The answer made his face close. I called that another withdrawal instead of the result of what I had said. I sat one step above him. The height helped. Luke admitted that his avoidance had made me carry choices I should not have carried alone. He also said I had taken the worst part of him and built a room where strangers could score it. I told him the room would include friends, not strangers. He asked whether that made it kinder. For a moment, the preview returned without my voice over it. Luke on the platform. Ruth asking me to stop. Aaron placing down the wristband. The bell sounding in a room that did not want another ring. Then Dana emailed to confirm attendance. I closed the thought. Professional opportunities did not wait for perfect marriages. My new plan was to remove the childhood question and make the final round lighter. I offered Luke a public reset. If he completed one strong refusal during the birthday game, I would ring the bell for him, end the comparison, and tell the room he had surprised me. Luke asked why his dignity required passing a test I controlled. I told him marriage always involved tests. Most couples simply lacked the courage to name them. He pressed his thumb into the scar and said I was still treating his no as the first stage of a negotiation. That sentence irritated me because it sounded like material from my own workshops. Victor called that evening. Several participants had requested that their partners attend. He also said Aaron had withdrawn from the final game. Victor wanted to replace him with a gym coach named Malik. I asked why partners suddenly mattered. Victor said transparency made people more comfortable. Luke stood across the room while I took the call. He could not hear Victor's side, but his face stayed calm, almost settled. My eyes moved to his hand. The thumb rested against the scar. The person I had failed to count was not Ruth. It was every partner who would watch the men perform courage while knowing what they avoided at home. I decided that made the game stronger. Elena stopped coming to planning meetings. She sent revised cards through email and blamed a client deadline. Her comments became shorter. Remove this. Too personal. Check consent. I accepted the edits that did not weaken my best round. The social circle thinned in smaller ways. Ruth stopped answering questions about cake. Paul's partner declined my request to help decorate. Simon asked Victor whether guests could leave before final choice without crossing the activity floor. Each practical question pointed toward an exit, but I treated exits as venue planning. At dinner, 5 days before the party, Luke asked me one last time to cancel. He said we could invite everyone to the gym, eat cake, and climb. No scores, no comparisons, no bell. I asked what he would give me in return for the lost contract. Luke said he would give me an honest conversation and accept his share of the marriage's failure. That offer sounded small beside a room full of decision-makers. I refused without using the word no. I explained deposits, clients, and reputation until refusal sounded like responsibility. Luke listened. Then he closed the padded bell case and slid it across the table to me. He said I should bring it because the party would need a clear ending. I read that as surrender. The game was still happening, and he had handed me the bell. On the morning of Luke's birthday, Summit North looked designed for my success. Black wristbands hung beside the check-in desk. The digital board showed 6 empty score columns. Victor's staff placed the brass bell on a waist-high stand beneath the climbing wall. Elena was supposed to arrive at 4. At 3:40, she sent one message saying she was sick. No apology. No offer to join online. Her name disappeared from the event schedule before the first guest arrived. I told myself she was afraid of being associated with something bold. Luke came early in a dark blue shirt. He carried no gift and wore no birthday smile. He walked through the room, checked the marked exits, and thanked Victor's staff by name. Each time someone asked if he was ready, his thumb moved to the scar in his palm. I called it nerves. Before the doors opened, Luke asked me to stand with him near the equipment lockers. He said this was the last private minute we would have. Then I gave him the one accusation he could not reject. I told him he had made me choose everything for years, then looked wounded when I became controlling. He handed me menus, holidays, budgets, and family arguments. After I decided, he judged the result from the safety of silence. Luke said I was right. The answer arrived without defense, and for one breath I had nowhere to push. He admitted that avoiding conflict had placed unfair weight on me. He asked me to leave the bell in its case and walk into the party as his wife. We could tell the guests the game was cancelled. He would explain that the decision was his. That was his final offer. It included the public no I claimed to want. I still refused. I told him one late boundary did not repair years of passivity. If he wanted the room to believe he had changed, he could prove it under the same pressure every other man would face. Luke pressed the scar once. Then he said he would sit where I placed him and let me reach the final question. Acceptance. Clear and complete. Guests filled the gym lounge. Ruth came with her husband. 4 contestants arrived with partners. Malik wore a coach's shirt. Victor stood near the control tablet. Dana brought another HR director. Luke's clinic supervisor came because I wanted someone important from his world to see the contrast. Victor reviewed the rules at the check-in desk and reminded me that any contestant could stop. I told him that was already built into a game about saying no. Technically, a public exit would only prove the design worked. He did not smile. Birthday decorations softened the space without hiding its purpose. Blue paper lanterns hung beneath the climbing ropes. A cake waited behind the bell. Luke's name appeared on one small banner, while Backbone Challenge filled the digital board in letters twice as large. I saw no problem with that balance. 23 guests, 6 columns, 1 bell waiting. I began with say no. Malik refused an imaginary request to cover a co-worker's shift for the 4th weekend. Laughter. Wristband. Bell. Paul refused when his partner asked him to cancel a trip. She laughed with everyone else, but her arms remained folded. Wristband. Bell. Simon rejected a fake demand from Victor. The room warmed. People understood the rhythm. A man said no. I rewarded him, and laughter made the judgment safe. Luke's turn came. I handed him my handbag and asked him to refuse carrying it. He placed it beneath my chair so nobody would trip. The room laughed. Not everyone, but enough. I told them Luke could turn any boundary into an errand. Bell for the other men. Nothing for my husband. The next laugh came from someone near Dana, quick and uncertain. That was enough for the room to continue. Guests looked at one another before joining, but shared laughter has its own momentum. By the 3rd ring, even people who disliked the premise understood when they were expected to react. Take the lead went better. Malik chose the next climbing route without asking the group. Paul told his partner which restaurant they would visit afterward. Simon interrupted Victor to correct a rule. Each small act looked powerful under bright lights. Luke's card asked him to say I had designed a bad game. He looked at Dana, Ruth, and the contestants. His thumb pressed into the scar. He said the game was not bad because it failed. It was bad because it worked exactly as I wanted. The room became quiet, so I laughed and told everyone the therapist had escaped into wordplay again. A few guests followed me. Victor did not. No wristband for Luke. In Hold Your Ground, I brought out the balance platform. The men stayed upright while guests called harmless distractions. When Luke stepped onto it, I changed the task. I asked each contestant to name one time Luke had agreed because he lacked a spine. Victor moved one hand toward the control tablet, then stopped. He had already warned me about changing approved cards. I knew he would not interrupt a paid event in front of potential clients. His business instinct was still stronger than his discomfort, and I counted on it. Paul mentioned a cancelled fishing weekend. Simon named a loan Luke never requested back. Malik did not know Luke well enough, so he said nothing. The first 2 stories drew uncomfortable laughter. I rang the bell after each one. Then I crossed the line that could not be repackaged later. I told the invited clients that Luke was the living case study behind Backbone Challenge. I said loving a doormat had taught me why leadership programs failed when kindness replaced courage. Dana lowered her event card. Ruth stood but did not leave. Luke's supervisor looked at Victor. Luke remained on the platform. His face showed no surprise, only that old pressure of thumb against scar. I opened final choice. Every man received one last card. The question asked whether he would protect peace if the price was his own respect. Malak placed his card face down. Paul did the same. Simon looked toward his partner instead of me. I assumed the question had finally become difficult enough to prove my point. Then I turned to Luke and asked the room to decide which man there was less of a doormat than my husband. Several guests laughed because laughter had carried them through every earlier round. I lifted the brass bell, ready to ring for the winner. Luke stepped down from the platform and pressed his thumb into the scar one final time. By then, I was certain he had no answer strong enough to take the room from me. Luke stood beside the bell and looked at each contestant before he looked at me. Then he said one sentence. He said I had asked which man in the room was less of a doormat than him, but he was the only one who had finally said no to me. Nobody laughed. Luke's thumb moved away from the scar. All evening I had read the pressure as fear. Now his hand opened beside him, steady and empty. The gesture had never been him waiting for me to decide. It was the small act he used while choosing whether peace was worth one more surrender. Ruth sat down again. Paul's partner pushed her chair back from him. Dana placed her pen across the closed notebook. The room did not explode or accuse me. It simply stopped helping me. My hand stayed above the bell. The metal handle pressed a cold line into my palm, but I did not ring it. Victor turned off the digital board. 6 empty columns vanished into one black screen. The planted details shifted into their true positions. Victor's message about final choice had not been a mistake. He had forwarded my first run sheet to Luke after I claimed verbal consent. The revised form, the preserved preview recording, the partners added to the guest list, and the men who stopped rehearsing were not separate problems. Luke had known since the second week. He had asked Victor not to cancel. He wanted one clean answer to the final private question he had asked at home. Whether my career mattered more than his no. Paul pushed his black wristband toward me. He admitted that Luke had shown him the personal card before the party and asked whether he truly wanted to help score a friend's marriage. Simon placed his wristband beside Paul's. Malik had never accepted one. They were not brave allies for Luke. 2 had still played. 2 had still laughed. The sentence did not make them loyal. It only removed the story that their laughter belonged to me. I tried to tell Dana that difficult workshops often created discomfort before learning. She closed her notebook and said leadership training could not begin by ignoring the clearest boundary in the room. My professional language did not move her. Victor removed the brass bell from its stand and placed it inside the padded case. He said Summit North would not host the corporate version or use footage from the party. His decision followed the revised consent form I had dismissed. Technically, Victor never called me abusive or unprofessional. He did not need either word. One cancelled date on the control tablet told the clients what his careful language avoided. I looked for Elena, though I already knew her name had disappeared from the schedule. There was no colleague near the door and no message on my phone. A week later, Luke's attorney sent a proposed separation agreement with mediation scheduled for the following month. I moved into the small apartment above my office while Luke remained in the townhouse near his clinic. Our joint account became bills only, and the lost gym deposit came from my business reserve. Ruth stopped answering social messages, while Paul and Simon disappeared from every gathering I still attended. Victor cancelled our 3 provisional workshop dates and returned my equipment through a courier. Dana withdrew both client referrals, and 2 existing companies requested copies of my consent policy before renewing. I had built a career by teaching people that no was a complete answer, then designed my largest event around refusing to hear one. I still believe Luke made passivity look noble for too long. I also know my game did not give him a spine. It only gave his first clear boundary an audience large enough to cost me everything. The brass bell was gone when Victor returned my supplies, but its padded case remained beneath the cancelled cards. His grandfather's initials are still inside the lid, above the empty space where I once kept score.